All right, let's do this.
All right.
Okay, Mr. Ron Carter. First of all, thank you for agreeing to do this and being here and being there as your reputation holds before you, right on time. You've
Yes,
done your
indeed.
sound check. Everything is in on point, and of course, Penny's in the background. But I just wanted to thank you, Penny, for making this whole process so smooth, so professional, and having such an open mind, to look this way and make this happen. Mr. Carter, before I start, I thought I'd give you a little context about jazz
Okay.
and
Okay.
jazz in India in particular, and
Okay.
why this is relevant today. India's had a long association with jazz, and it goes back to the 1920s and 30s when musicians who were working on cruise ships from the US would sort of land in Bombay and Calcutta on the coast and mingle and interact with local musicians. India was going through a freedom struggle or an independence struggle, and these musicians would usually play in the ballrooms of big hotels. So jazz got stereotyped as something that was foreign. But a lot of the musicians who learned how to read and arrange went to Bombay into the upcoming music movie industry.
Okay.
And they really did sort of define the early cinema score. And if there's anything that's big in India and unites India, which is so spread out and heterogeneous, it is either cricket or music and Bollywood.
Okay. Okay.
But in the last 10 years, there's been a big shift and especially a resurgence in jazz. We've got some great jazz clubs, especially in the national capital, the Piano Man Jazz Club, and we've got schools that are focused on jazz studies and
Okay.
bringing a whole new generation. Small schools like us and a couple in Nepal and in the north. And so we've got a whole bunch of young people who are starting to look at the roots of jazz and contemporary jazz, and it's great to actually have a master with us and somebody with whom we can sort of have a little timestamp and a little discussion about, well, what was happening over those last 60 years. And you've been a pivot point, not only for a lot of other music, but you've shaped it. And one of the things that really helped me in the research that I've been doing was reading your book, Finding the Right Notes.
Hmm.
And for those of us, or those of you who are listening out there and will be looking at this, I highly recommend it because it's an incredible piece of music journalism. It's about Mr. Ron Carter, but it's also about how um, jazz has evolved over the last 60 years, and it's got a great introduction to the recording labels like Prestige and Columbia and CTI, and it was really, really informative. So I want to go back and talk a little bit about your history in Detroit.
Okay.
Many of our young listeners may not know, but you're as accomplished a classical musician as you are a jazz musician. And you grew up in post-war Detroit, which seemed to have been a melting pot, it was a difficult time. You had all these people coming into the city. There was racial tensions. There was all these other things, and you had a big family. You were a sibling of eight. You were a family of eight. How did music come into this? How did you have time? What was happening? And how did you pick up the cello?
That's about 9 questions. Let me
Sorry.
back up and do. I'll do the last one
Yeah.
first. At some point, I was 13 or 12 probably. The teacher walks into our room. It's an all-black school who had only went as far as the eighth grade, and then after the eighth grade, you went to the local white high school.
Okay.
This older white lady walks into this room with these young black kids who are no more than 12, and she has laid out a desktop full of instruments. I can't remember what they were, but there were a lot of things on this desk. And she says to children, I'm going to start an orchestra here. And I want you to pick up an instrument that you think fascinates you, that you're going to learn how to play for this orchestra that I'm going to put together for the next whatever it takes. And we we walked up there very carefully and very timidly, and we picked out something we thought we would like to play, and my choice was the cello for some reason or other. And as it turned out, I had a skill to play music. My father made a banjo at some point. My sister's, that's my stockbroker, sorry. A sock broker, sorry.
Do,
Sock
do your
broker.
thing.
I'm on the Zoom, I'll call you right back. I'm on Zoom. I'll call you right back. SOCK, stockbroker.
One of those,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. So I ultimately took the cello up and uh, realized they, the people in charge, realized that this kid has some talent. Let's give him a teacher. So they talked to my parents, who were able to put together the money for to buy a cello, a starting instrument, and afford the lessons for like $2 an hour, which is a lot of money back in the day of 1947, something like
Right.
that, man. You know. And as I got better, my teachers recognized that they could no longer describe what I needed, so they get me to the next level of teachers.
Right.
So it wasn't that I got better; my teachers got better.
Amazing.
And as my teachers got better, I improved, and I won some awards as the outstanding cellist at 14 and stuff like that. And I ended up by going to a place called Cass Tech. My father finally got a job at the Detroit DSR, Detroit Street and Railways, under the condition that he would move to Detroit if he took this job. I'm born in Frenton, Michigan, which is 1 block from Detroit, so it wasn't a big deal. And so he said yes. So he moved to Detroit, and the family all moved there, uh, which meant, among other things, my sisters, who were 4 or 5 years older than I, they would no longer have to walk 2 miles to the White High School
Amazing.
because that's all we had. You know.
Wow.
Having said that, I went to Cass 1950, 55 to 58, and as I'm really playing really good cello now, I have a top flight teacher. I'm making some waves in the classical world as this young black kid who plays wonderful cello. How does he do that kind of stuff? I look around, Mister. I look around, and the orchestra goes out for these PTA meeting kind of events where they want some kind of background music, you know,
Right.
just to kind of keep the audience kind of keep the roar down from the conversations when they're speaking. And they would call these schools Cass Tech in this case to provide music from their ensembles for this events.
Right.
I noticed that I wasn't getting the calls I thought I had earned. I'm the top flight cellist here, and they're hiring everyone who plays cello but me. So I noticed that in January of 1955, that the bass player in the orchestra is graduating, and I'm pretty good at some math. And I say, if you subtract one from one, you have zero. Well, let me fix that zero. If I'm the new kid who now is replacing the zero and the only bass player, they have to call me.
Right.
And they did, and they still are. And I'm being a little facetious at that little last comment.
No, but that's true. And this Cass High School had
Gas
other
Tech.
Cass Tech had Paul Chambers, had some other musicians who were also in the scene.
Yeah, Donald Byrd came through there, Kenny Burrell.
Right.
It was the beginning of the hotbed of organizing a jazz environment that later took over Detroit City in itself with Barry Harris. You had Yusuf Lateef. You had the
Wow.
Burrell brothers. You had Wilbur Hart, a wonderful flugelhorn player. You had Tommy Flanagan. You had the Jones brothers. I mean, the width and breadth of the musicians who were in Detroit at that time, the early '50s, was stunning. And
Incredible.
while I was not a part of that scene, I was still a classical player. I appreciated that these guys, man, they got a whole other vibe going in town. They are the music in Detroit. They are the stamp that says automobiles Detroit, jazz Detroit.
Amazing. But were you listening to jazz at that point? I mean,
No,
did it catch you? No.
not at all. I didn't start listening to jazz until my freshman year in college.
Mm.
And I would come home for vacations and summer vacations or holidays, and my saxophone player neighbor said he's putting together a group to play at the weekend parties at the university. Did I want to join the band? I said, well, I don't know the library, but if you give me some records, I'll figure out what to do by the time we get to gigs.
Right.
And at the time, he was a fan of Dave Brubeck. The big record was Jazz Goes to College with Paul Desmond
Right.
and Ron Crotty and Norman Bates, a really great band. That was the first really big jazz record,
Right.
and it was recorded live at this university in the Midwest. So that was my library. Learn those tunes on that record. And my
Amazing.
friend also liked Charlie Parker, so I had to learn some of the Bird melodies, and not knowing what to do with them. I could read, I could hear, I could figure out what they were, but I'm kind of, uh, I'm like a duck who swims, but the water's over my head.
But
And
you had I'm just this is at Eastman, right? I mean, when you
Yes,
arrive, you
yes,
start getting into partly by necessity as well. I mean,
yes,
you were on a scholarship, but this
yes,
afforded you the ability to make some, well, much needed
yes,
cash at that time.
yes,
Right. And did you have, I was reading about Chuck and Gap Mangione.
yes.
They,
Their parents saved me. They would come over. They said, "Look, get over here for dinner. You're off right now. Get over here for lunch." And they were really the jazz family of Rochester. All the guys who worked at a club called the Ridgecrest Inn, which was the local jazz hotspot. And I was fortunate enough to be the bass player in the house band for these acts would come in as singles by and large.
amazing.
They would have Dizzy Gillespie and they would have Slam Stewart and they would have the Teddy Kotick. The guys would come by their homes for lunch or dinner, whatever meal the Mangione set up for them. So Gap and Charlie, they were familiar with all the big name and jazz acts, you know. Like Charlie had a band called the Little Giants,
Uh-huh.
and it was out of the Miles Davis, Sonny Rollins environment.
Okay.
Little Benny Salzano played tenor, Chuck played trumpet, I played bass. Roy McCurdy, who turned out to be a wonderful drummer in California, played drums, and the piano player Robert Johnson played in the Bud Powell School. So we had our own small New York environment at the Rochester and the Eastman School of Music environment.
Right. But how were you learning jazz? I mean, you were still, your mind was still on, making it in the classical world.
Yes. Uh, well, I kind of learned by talking to the people. First of all, I was working this weekend as a house band bass player,
Right.
and that means that whoever the featured act was for the week, whether it's Gillespie's quartet or Carmen McRae's quintet or Horace Silver's band or J.J. Johnson, I'd hear these guys playing this music 2 sets a night for every weekend that came by for the year and a half I was at this house band job. So while I was not taking lessons in terms of lessons as we understand lessons,
Right.
I was pretty good. I had a great attention span, and I didn't mind asking questions about how do I let you know where we are in the song?
Uh-huh.
How do I learn this material?
Right.
How do I develop the capacity to not get tired at the end of the gig? I mean, I'm playing in the orchestra. We've got 7 bass players in the orchestra. You don't get tired because you got 7 guys playing the same note. I'm playing in this jazz band where there's only one guy playing that note,
Right.
and it's got to be
Right.
the best note that you can find. How do I do that?
Amazing.
They would
And it
say,
must,
"Well, you'll find it. You'll find it. But you got to keep plugging until you hear what you hear, and then find out where it is." I had
incredible.
no specific instruction. No, I was on my own.
That's incredible. And it must have been quite, I mean, to go into a situation like that, let's say you've got Dizzy Gillespie's band. I mean, the arrangements must be intricate. I mean, they must
Complicated.
have,
Yes.
yeah. But how would you handle that? How would you approach that at that age? Was it just, yes, I'm going to do this? And
Well, I understood form and I understood chord progressions. One of the things we did at school, Eastman, was the theory teacher would play a Bach chorale, and we had to write down the harmony of this chorale. And he was a really wise guy in terms of smart ass, so pardon my French. He would say, this song is not in the key of F, but it would actually be in the key of E flat.
aha,
He was doing that so people who had perfect pitch would not just their ability to count the notes. He wanted them to hear what the color of this chord was: major, minor, augmented, 1, 3, sharp, sharp, 6 flat, 6 flat. So he wanted us to identify the chords.
amazing.
I think because that was part of how I began to understand harmony and identify certain chords based on this Bach analysis concept we were taught for a couple of years. And I'm very competitive, man, and I wasn't going to let them think that I couldn't hear what they could hear.
Right.
I wasn't going to accept that they could out-listen me. No, I wasn't buying that program. No, so I gave it my undivided attention, and this desire to be good at this,
Right.
knowing I had limited input as to how to be good at this, helped me begin to understand how to get good at it.
Right. But
And those people who I asked, they understood I'm learning, and they didn't try to put me through any special hoops or to trick me. They were honest guys. They were pleasant people to say, well, you got to do this. You should learn how to do this, and just keep doing it until you get it right.
Right. Amazing. And you also had, I mean, you rose through the ranks at Eastman and became first chair, cello, the orchestra. You had this, I mean, incredible career as a student. But there was a pivot point, right? When you had, when you were really looking for jobs and you were looking to graduate, you had that interaction with the director of the Houston Orchestra, who said that you're amazing, but we're not progressive enough to have you.
Basically, yes.
Yeah,
He was
and
that was Leopold Stokowski, and he was conducting at the time the Dallas Philharmonic, and he was a guest conductor of the Eastman Philharmonic at
mm,
the time. Eastman Philharmonic was based on the opening chairs were always housed by the students at Eastman.
right,
So the orchestra personnel, the conductor, the director, whoever they were, they would decide which student would be in the orchestra for this last semester of their term in school. And this year they needed a bass player to fill out the bass section. And the personnel, decided that I was the guy of the bass players who's most qualified to be in the Philharmonic Orchestra.
right.
So I had a chance to play with wonderful classical conductors, Leopold Stokowski,
Wow,
Pierre Montreux, just a wonderful host of classical conductors.
incredible.
And at some point during my career there, I'm the Leopold Stokowski, who was like a 5'6", something like that. Now I'm 6'4". He calls me over and I sit down and have a chair next to him. 'Cause I think we're really the same height. And he says, "Young man, I'd like to have you in my orchestra. I noticed you're playing the parts, and I think you'd be a wonderful person to have in my orchestra down in Texas. But I'm afraid they're not ready to have colored people in the orchestra yet." So I said, "Well," I thanked him for his honesty, and I had asked. I, I've been encouraged by the jazz groups I played opposite in Rochester about coming to New York. I'm graduating pretty soon. He said, "Well, man, in New York always needs a good bass player, and you maybe have the tools to be that guy. So you should come on, take a chance." So I graduated August of 19 July. I graduated June of 1958. Let's say 50, 59. And I went to New York August of 59. And I joined the band with Eric Dolphy, playing with Chico Hamilton, September of 59.
Right.
And it was my first big gig on the New York jazz scene.
And you also auditioned at that time for Cedar Walton and Benny Golson. Those were
Well,
also,
they heard me play. They thought I'd be a nice person for their band. They were just kind of looking for personnel. And they'd done their research and looked around and found guys who were new or old who could cover this jazz chair that we're looking for the bass player to fill. And they thought that I'd be a nice person to. I had the what's the right? I had the apparent talent to be a special player,
right.
and they wanted to take a chance to see if they guessed right. And I guess they stopped guessing after the first 3 years.
But Benny Golson did sort of mentor you through your early years in New York. Is that correct?
Well, at the time he was putting together a group ultimately called the Jazz Tet,
Hmm.
and he was putting together a band. And I was working with Randy West and a wonderful pianist at the place called the Foss by the world-renowned jazz club, and he came by one night and heard me play, I guess, and he was opening auditions for bass players to join his newly formed group called the Jazz Tet.
Wow.
And I went to his house in the basement of New York apartment house. Oh, Miss Benny Golson. Wow, this Mr. Golson, Mr. Golson, yeah. So I played the book, and he gets on the phone right away and calls Art Farmer, who's a trumpet player who's part of this band. He
Right.
says, "Art, I found the guy."
Amazing.
I found the guy. Don't worry, I got the guy for us now. And he hangs up the phone, and he says, "Well, Ron, we're going on the road in 2 weeks for this tour I'm putting together." I said, "Mr. Golson, I got class. I can't leave right now." He said, "Okay, well, tell you what you do. You finish this school, and I will call you when you graduate." So he told me to stay in school and finish, which I did.
Amazing.
Ultimately, 20 years ended by having Benny Golson play in my band.
That's comes full circle. That's so cool.
Yes, yes,
But I mean, the story and that link of the connection with Art Farmer is really important, right? Because that leads you to
yes.
Miles Davis eventually.
Ultimately, yes.
Yeah.
I'm working at this club called the Half Note in New York, down on Spring and Hudson back in the day.
Right.
And the word is out. In New York, man, nothing goes unheard.
Right.
New
Especially if
York
you're
is
good.
New York is possibly the biggest gossip Gotham City on the planet. And everyone knew that Miles's band was about to break up for reasons, musical reasons. The piano player, Wynton Kelly, the bassist, Paul Chambers, and the drummer, Jimmy Cobb, were going to leave to form a quartet with the wonderful Wes Montgomery.
Oh, wow.
And at some point, Miles would have to put together another band. So I'm playing with Art Farmer now at this club, and Miles walks in during the course of the first night of the gig, and waits for intermission, and so walks to me and says, I'm putting together a band to, I got a West Coast, 6 week West Coast tour. And I'm assembling a band because the band is leaving to join Wes Montgomery. And I want you to join the band. Well, I said, Mr. Davis, I have got a job right now. I'm working with Mr. Farmer for the next 2 weeks. And if you'd like to have me join your band, you will have to ask Mr. Farmer if I can be excused from his commitment. And he said, oh, okay. And so he walks over to Art Farmer. They go into a little huddle by the record player, by the jukebox back in the day. And I guess Miles pleads his case or whatever he did. And Art said, sure. So Miles comes back to me and says, well, Art Farmer just gave me permission to hire you from him. I said, okay. So we do that. I got another job, so I'm going to finish out this night with Art Farmer. And Art says, hey man, I'm just pleased that you would be courteous enough
That's amazing.
and
Right.
respectful enough for me to ask me, could you join Miles? Because everybody knows who he is.
Yeah, right.
Everybody knows he got the best band on the planet.
Right.
And that you would tell this guy no
Right.
to play with this not best band on the planet is amazing to me. I said, well, Art, I told you I was going to be on this gig till it was over. And it's not over, man, until you say it's over.
That's
And I'm
am-
fine with that. So
that's amazing.
I think I grew up at two levels with Art's respect and with Miles' understanding what a commitment I had. That I'm the guy for that commitment. I'm going to the mat for this commitment.
Right.
And that they gave me two people who were important in my life, understood what my values were, and let me put in play. This is what I'm all about. Here's a chance for me to check my morals, my values, to
Right.
see if I really mean this is what I do, and am I willing to pay the consequences? And in this case, I mean, turning down the greatest band on the planet to play with another good band, but not Miles Davis Quintet.
Right.
And that band had Jim Hall in, who I was my partner for 30 years as a duo.
Right. Right.
And Art Farmer and I, we made several good records together. So we still remain even more friends because they understood the commitment I was making to art. It was okay until Art said that it was enough, that you can go do this other gig because you asked me for it. And Miles understood that, man, this guy tells me he's not going to join the greatest band on the planet because he's got this other gig he's committed to. That's says something about his value to music
Right. Yeah.
and his commitment to the band leader, whoever he happens to be. In this case, it's my friend Art Farmer. So it kind of let me establish a level of responsibility in the industry that I wasn't quite a part of yet. I'm just a new guy on the scene, just kind of visiting New York, basically. Until I got this gig with Miles Davis, then I was officially a New York resident.
And also, probably from what it seems in in the book, um, established a really sort of equal footing with Miles in some ways, right? He seemed to really respect you, and
Yes,
he took you golfing, and he enjoyed driving cars with you, and
yes.
that was different. I mean, he didn't sort of open up in that way with other musicians, perhaps.
Well, our conversations was very seldom about music.
Mm,
It was about life. It was about the politics in New York at the time. It was about athletes and boxing, for specifically.
right.
He liked to talk about the stock market. So
Really
while he was clearly Miles Davis, he was Miles Davis with several interests other than playing the trumpet and playing music. And it was nice. It gave me a chance to watch him put together a day that didn't involve playing trumpet.
amazing.
His day involved looking at the stock market in the New York Times
Or
or
driving a
talking
Ferrari.
or driving his Maserati at the time, or uh, being aware of clothing fashion.
Very cool.
So I think that that incident with Art Farmer and Miles let him know that this is a guy who he could put his ultimate personal trust with, knowing that our relationship would not go to page 6 in the local scandal sheet,
Right.
and that I had a pretty broad concept for a guy who was 20 about things other than how to play the bass better.
Right.
And that was never a question for him. It was always, let's go to the driving range and hit some driving balls for a while. Let's get in physical condition to make this gig tomorrow night, or whatever the night gig was. And he trusted my job. I paid the band. I check on the reservations at the hotels. He trusted me to do the stuff that he didn't want to do, but he wanted to trust someone who he could count on to deliver.
Right.
And I was good at that.
In fact, there's an interesting story. I know there's a lot of information on your time with Miles out there, but there's one story that I thought was really interesting, and that was the first audition that you had with a young Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock, and Wayne. And Miles asked you to audition in the basement, and he's listening upstairs through some speaker, through a little intercom.
Hmm.
How much? What was that session like? Did you know? Did you know you were being auditioned? Did you know? Did any of those? Let me break that into two questions. Did you know any that you were being sort of tested? And the second is, did any of those ideas make it to the album?
Uh, the second question first. None of them made that idea to a record because we had no real library. We were still playing the old book,
Okay.
the kind of blue book. So the
Okay.
records we recorded, the records from Seven Step to Heaven, our first band record. None of those tunes we knew at the time, so we were not playing the new theoretically band library. Uh, we kind of thought in hindsight, maybe a year or so later, that Miles was upstairs listening to the band to see how could these guys play together.
Hmm.
Who was ultimately going to lead these guys somewhere musically? Who's going to call the shots, so to speak? Who's going to decide, guys, this is the top of the tune.
Right.
This is the bridge.
Right.
These are the right changes to this song.
Right.
Who's gonna do that kind of job? And while I didn't understand that's what I was doing, clearly I was doing that. And that made him feel comfortable that not only am I responsible for the job in terms of non-musically related events that I would take care of, but I'm a pretty good band leader as a bass player. And I think that helped him be more comfortable. He made the right choice. Because I'm
Yeah.
sure he had thousands of choices, hundreds of choices of guys who would take the Paul Chambers chair. You know?
Phenomenal. That's incredible. That's real history right there. But while you played together as a quintet, you had so many albums that were recorded live. I mean, it seems one of the comments there was that you may not have known that all of them were recorded live. In fact, I found one at a record store about My Funny Valentine. It's such an incredible
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, just take. Did you ever know even after the concert was over that this was recorded? I mean, you have no. How do you deal
No,
with that?
no, we didn't know they were recorded until we saw the record on the record band at the store. And ultimately, it fell on my shoulders to be responsible enough to get us paid. So I would buy the record, and I would take the record down to the local union in New York, local 802, there, and tell them that we made this record for Columbia and we haven't gotten paid yet. Can you work this out? And they ultimately got the salary for us for the recording session for the four players.
Amazing.
Uh, but in hindsight, I think we would have played the same. I think we were not used to. I think we were not used to recording live early in our careers. We'd have done it, of course, you know. But I think we were just four guys, five guys who were into this laboratory, and the head chemist was Miles Davis, and he brought in these four assistants: me, Wayne or George, Herbie and Tony and me. And he presented these sets of chemicals that we call songs. And he would distribute these chemicals to the band to put them on the table. He said, now I'm going to give you guys a tempo. Let's find something to do with these chemicals that make the band sound good and these tunes sound really nice.
Amazing.
And the results of those experiments is Seven Steps to Heaven or My Funny Valentine or
Right.
Four and More or Miles at Antibes or Miles in Tokyo, whatever live records we did, that's the result of those records because he trusted our sense of leaving our ego at home and bringing special ears to the recording sessions and to the live concerts.
Those were all recorded on Columbia, right?
Yes,
With
yes.
Rudy Van Gelder.
Not the live ones.
Right.
The live ones were done on the set wherever we were.
Wow. I mean, it could be a new engineer anytime. It was just
Yes. Yeah, but they
incredible.
just recorded. They didn't do anything but record the music. They didn't make the music. Their job was easy. Our job was trying to make some music.
Incredible. Now, before Miles, you did get offered a job. I mean, you did get the opportunity to be a leader. This was
Yes.
right with Verve,
Mm-mm. Well, my first record was a leader was with Prestige.
Prestige, New
Called
Jazz. Right.
Where? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Esmond Edwards was the producer at the time. Was a good photographer too. By the way, he took the cover shot with me standing on that thing with a cello in one hand and bass on the other. Um, he called me one day. He said, "I'm putting together a whole new label called New Jazz, and I wanted to know if you want to interested in doing a band leader record." And I said, well, "Esmond, I'm not. I'm pretty inexperienced as to how that's supposed to work, you know." He said, "Well, I'll walk you through it, but you should be able to do this record. That's
Right.
your destiny is it for you to do this record as a band leader." And
Amazing.
I said, "Well, okay." I knew I had worked with Eric Dolphy for a while, and I had worked with Charlie Persip with his band, you know, and I had done some things with Mel Waldron. I knew the band.
Right.
Well, I didn't know George Vivier personally. I did have such him in such high respect. I thought if I'm going to do something with two bass players, George Vivier must be the other guy because of his character, because of his playing the bass, because of his musicianship, because what I view as his warmth and understanding of here's this new kid on the block who needs my help. I just go ahead and give it to him because that's what I do. And it turned out to be a very good record with these guys. I thank Esmond Edwards for having the confidence that I could deliver a project that he would be completely responsible for, that the company would buy and do some PR for.
Incredible.
1961, I think.
You were still at the Manhattan. You were still in college at that point.
Yes, I graduated June of 1961. Yeah, with a master's in string bass.
Very cool. I want to, just for the sake of time, I do want to move to a different line of questions for you.
Okay.
But before we leave, I want to just touch upon, which I thought was fascinating, CTI Clark Taylor Records, CTI out, out records or industries.
Yes.
You recorded so much with them. I mean, you were sort of this in-house powerhouse sideman who,
Yes.
was responsible for making significant changes and contributions to Stanley Tarantino's Sugar, all of these
Hmm.
great tunes. But you seem to have a special affinity uh, for Hobin. What was that? There seems to be in that chapter in the book something that you really enjoyed working with him. What can you tell us a little bit about that relationship?
Yeah, I met him when he was with a Verve or A&M Music when Creed Taylor was at the time the A&R man. Uh, at at that time, Stan Getz had a big record, Bossa Nova record, him and the singer. Then along came Brazil '69 with Sergio Mendes.
Right.
And Creed Taylor was putting together his roster of people who wanted to record, and he knew that Joe Beam, who had written most of those famous songs, he wanted to get him to make a record for his label, which time was A&M. And so he calls me up and says, "I got this record with this Brazilian guy named Antonio Carlos Jobim. Are you available?" I said, "Well, for him, I'll be available because I don't know what they do. I'll just give it a shot." So I get the call to the time and date. I go to the studio and I speak. I spoke then and now speak no Portuguese, none. And Carlos spoke just enough English to help me understand what I thought he wanted to say to me. So I
Right.
explained to him that I really don't know how to play what you want me to play because I do know some of the records from Stan Getz, but I have a view of how I can make that work. What do you think about that? He said, "Well, Creed told me that you're the guy to make this record. And that means for me that you're the guy to make this record." So whatever you're going to do, we're going to make it work. And with that kind of confidence in my ability that I'm working on, working very carefully,
Right.
I decided to play what I hear,
Right.
you know. And man, he was. I'm not sure who was more thrilled and surprised than I was, because it really worked great, and he was thrilled that I could do that, not knowing the general bossa nova beat other than what I heard on the records, you know. And we made several records in the meantime. We had about 8 or 9 discs, and I was on the Joe Beam tribute down in South America when they had it in Rio. He became one of my dear friends because he's such a lovely person to have a friend with.
Amazing.
You know, when I went down there, we have lunch, we have dinner, we have go to the restaurants for a special lunch on Fridays. You know, and just a genius at writing those kind of songs that are really valuable in this case to the Brazilian library,
Right.
and that this leader of this Brazilian compositional concept thinks that I'm the guy who made this concept sound even better as a bass player was a thrill for me, you know, and I just kind of shudder at that responsibility that he gave me for being this music bass player. It's just amazing.
Amazing. That's what a story. Um, and at CTI, you also started working with, I guess, guitar players like Kenny Burrell, George Benson, and Wes Montgomery.
Hmm.
Um, did that really, is that where your sort of interest in getting together with another guitar player really sort of came through, or?
Well, I just thought that they were part of Creed's new label, CTI, and Creed had thrust me into the position of being the go-to guy when he was putting these personalities together. He wanted someone who he could depend on to be the mainstay of this music with these musicians, whoever they were.
Right.
And he thought that I had the right personality. Uh, I was clearly finding something to do with the bass a little different than most bass players had done up to that point. And he thought that I had respect of whoever else he hired, that they would respond to my thoughts of how to make this a little bit better than what you come in here with. Trust me on that. And he felt that they would. So
Right.
Stanley and Hank Crawford and Grover Washington and Kenny Burrell and Wes Montgomery and George Benson and all those guys, man, they trusted my judgment, not because, not just because Creed hired me, but they were party to enjoying his decision, which was to hire me.
Amazing. And then, of course, you went on to Blue Note and EMI, and then the
Mm-hmm.
Japan years, which seemed very exciting. And you were part of a resurgence in jazz and interest over there, right? Which is quite
Well,
exciting.
yeah, they know the history of the music. It's not unusual to have someone come to me with a record I made in 20 years ago, vinyl,
Right.
or know that their grandfather saw me 25
Sure.
years ago at the local Blue Note, or what the local jazz club was, or
Yeah.
the local Mount Fuji Jazz Festival.
Right.
They have a high regard for maintaining and sharing their knowledge of the history, in this case, of music. And interestingly enough, when they want to do commercials, they have no concern about the guy. If he's a jazz player, he must be the guy for the products. I've done several big commercials over there as a jazz player playing bass on this commercial, the coffee ad and a vitamin ad, the Suntory whiskey ad,
Oh yeah, the
vitamin.
famous Suntory
Yeah,
whiskey ad. Yeah.
yeah. So they treat the jazz community as a very important part of their lifestyle,
Amazing.
and it's nice to be a part of that.
That's phenomenal. I wanted to just talk a little bit about designing sets. I mean, you must be a master at this now over the 2000 records that you've been a part of. There was an interesting story about you being asked to put together a tribute for Miles in 2000 at Carnegie Hall, and you had your alumni, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, and Tony Williams together, and you guys pretty much have to go out and deliver this set, and you haven't had a rehearsal, and the first time you meet is just chit chat. How do you go into a situation like that? How do you deliver this masterful performance?
Well, I have a head start in that I know what makes them tick, and that's not knocking their ability. I just understand what it takes to make them comfortable. I think a good sideman understands that because he needs to have that in-depth concept before he can be a successful sideman. That means he has to understand what the artist, wherever they are, what do they need to make them miss me when I'm gone. And I've gotten very good at figuring out what does he need to make him feel comfortable with me being the bass player. And I think
Right.
I understood what Tony needed and what makes Herbie comfortable and what kind of tempo Wayne likes. I think I understood these things
Right.
from my past experience, and my job is to make them feel comfortable and do what I want to do within reason. You know, I'm not going out there dancing or wearing a funny suit. I'm just trying to make the bass be their inspiration. I'm
Right.
like the bass player with a
And
baton. You know.
and it's also, I mean, a lot of that is an interplay between, as some of us learn how to design our musical journeys and our sets, and part of it is, of course, interplay with musicians, but it's also about reading the room. And how does that come into play here?
Well, you know, being a sideman, as I still am, actually, for all these years, I watch how various band leaders respond to the audience. You know? Unfortunately, Miles has a reputation of ignoring the audience. Well, I've played with him
Mm,
5.5 years, and that's not true. He's really acutely aware of the response from the audience.
mm,
And every night we have a set in his head that he changes depending on how the audience responds to his order of songs. You know,
amazing.
I've seen J.J. Johnson on the second night play a tune just a little bit slower because he thought the audience didn't quite get to where he was trying to go. You know,
Right.
I played with Cedar Walton, who has a set format. He wants to have. I'll solo first on this tune. Ron, you do the second solo. They're reading how the audience responds to the band's presentation of their music. And what I've tried to do is add all those points of view into how I feel about making the set work. And yes, we are really aware of the audiences. You know, occasionally when I think the audience is getting out of hand, you know, like the weekend crowd come into the jazz club in New York, they're having a good time, they're
Mm,
partying, they come in a big limo with 8 people, you know, they're there for a good time.
right.
And the nightclub is not Carnegie Hall. So can I present a program to them that commands their attention, but still makes them feel like they're celebrating a wedding or an event? And it's at those times I'll play a ballad
Right.
that doesn't allow them to talk over the music without being embarrassed by their neighbors in the nightclub. Or I'll play something by myself that because of the instrument's lack of volume in general terms, it commands their attention. So they'll start to whisper that. So we're aware of the audience's presence in our. I am aware of the audience's presence when we make these gigs, man. We have to because they're the reason why we're on the stage.
Right.
They make us be there. Let's give them what I think they need to make them make the choice of being here at this band's performance the right thing to do.
Amazing. I guess you have to, I mean, you have to have that experience over time to just be able to read both at the same time, your fellow musicians, your audience, and be able to command both. I mean,
Yes,
it's
yes.
really those reading those stories. I mean, that's why I think whoever's watching this should actually get your hand on this book or hands on this book because it really is this 360-degree overview of how a musician approaches the everything from walking on stage to designing sets to what you feel afterwards, what you think people think of you. I just think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
um yeah, and I mean, I learned a lot in the last sort of week. I was looking for things to research and talk to you about, and of course there are all these interviews, but this really sort of put everything together. Penny, I just wanted to do a check. Are we okay on time? Can I ask a few more
Oh
questions?
yes, yeah, I'm sitting down, man.
Oh, okay, great, great, great. Just checking. So what are your influences beyond? I just wanted to thank Diane, our colleague, for asking a few very important questions to you. What are your influences beyond the music industry, and how has this community played, or those communities played a role in your development as a musician?
I think the largest non-musical influence in me would be my father. In that I watched him build a house for us, a
Amazing.
family of 10, mother, father, and eight kids. Six sisters and another brother, including me. So a family of 8 kids. I watched him find work when there was no work to be found.
Amazing.
Uh, I watched him get a job when they were not hiring African Americans. I watched him have us understand values of life and treating people equally. I watched him make sure that whatever went on during the course of the day, we all had 3 good meals to eat.
Amazing.
I watched him show my mom the ultimate respect of a lady who's at home doing the work in the house with 8 kids.
Right.
He's out there trying to find a job that they won't hire because he's African American.
Right.
That level of observation, it impacted me and my response as I sit here talking to you.
It's that's really wonderful, and I feel like if we just go back to you were talking about Cass High,
Hmm.
right? I mean that was a vocational school, right? I'm sure
Yes,
people were going in and getting trained to
yes,
go into the automotive industry, and yet your parents said it's okay for you to continue, and not just okay, but they encouraged you to go through this
yes,
process.
yes, yes,
As long as,
yes.
I mean, were there any conditions? Were there any ideas? Was there anything as such, or
They expected me to be good. No one knew what good meant during those days. No one knew how you define being good in terms of careers. They thought that being a teacher was being good, or being a doctor as an African American were an industry that did not discriminate against black people. They
right?
just wanted me to be good at whatever I decided to be, and they made sure that was possible by paying for lessons, by allowing me time to practice daily,
Amazing.
making sure that they bought me an instrument that would allow me to try to find what I hear with a decent response from the instrument in my hands.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, that brings us to a parallel story about, well, your family, which was so important all throughout this great period from the 60s all the way on. You got married pretty much in while you were at Manhattan
Eastman,
College. Yeah.
Eastman, Eastman.
Eastman.
My senior year, yeah, 19. I got married June 7, 1958.
So how did you balance this? I mean, here you are. I mean, you're exploding on the scene. Did you ever say no to commitments? How did you manage, if I may ask, to balance both these lives? I mean, you were out at night.
Um, I'm not sure how to answer that in the short answer. I'll give you two examples.
Sure.
I taught at City Colleges, CCNY, for almost 20 years, 18 and a half some odd years. I taught full time, not just to I taught arranging, I taught composition, I taught jazz history,
Wow.
as well as private lessons. So I'm teaching maybe a 10-hour week back in the day, which is really a serious 10 hours.
Right. Right.
And on those 18 and a half years, I missed 2 classes. One, I got late coming in from a flight, and two, a passing of a family member.
Okay.
And I use that example just to show you what kind of commitment I had to a commitment that I had made to these kids. They expect me to be there showing them how to do what I do, or how to
Right.
teach them how to listen to whatever I'm trying to teach them. They expect me to be there full time because they're enrolled full time.
Right.
You know, uh, I would turn down gigs if it took me away from school. I would only travel on weekends. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'd get back in time for the Monday at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock class. That's part of my recruitment requirements for these gigs. If I can't get back to my class at 9 a.m. Monday, I can't do the job.
Right.
But Ron, no, man. If I can't get back to my class at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, I can't do this. And I think those people who I told that to, they were so stunned by my sincerity and by me thinking how important it was to show my kids what responsibility really means and the consequences of being responsible, that was a good thing. So no one ever said, "Oh man, you said to drag." I said, "Well, look, no one said that to me." They said, "Well, when are you next available?"
Mm.
And we found another date because they understood that kind of personal commitment to the kids.
Very well.
I call them kids.
Yeah, I know
They,
what you mean. Yeah.
yeah, I'm, I'm the old guy on the block right now. Uh, But again, I think being responsible and understanding the consequences of what I've always kind of had back in my back pocket. I understand what taking a stand means.
Right.
I understand what the consequences are of taking that specific stand, and
Right.
I accept the consequences.
Right. You follow through. That's the point.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Right. I just want to say something. You're certainly not the old man on the block. I think, judging by how cool your I think you're showing us how to do Instagram right. So that's certainly not true. Um, another one of our colleagues had asked, how has your practice routine changed from a beginner uh, to now as a professional? And the second part to that would be, what are you working on yourself now?
Again, that's a different kind of question in that I'm playing the bass up until this last intermission, I call it. This pandemic stopped everything from working. Uh, I was playing the bass every night I could. So because I was on the bass nightly, literally, practice time wasn't so available to me anymore because I was
Mm,
always already playing bass. I'm
right,
in the club, I'm doing record dates, I'm teaching students, I'm on the bass 8 to 9 hours a day.
right,
So I'm not practicing. I don't need practice for that.
right,
I use
right.
the bandstand for my practice in terms
Practice.
of practice.
Right.
Uh, One of the things I transferred from the Manhattan, from the Eastman School classical environment was how to make my practices productive.
Okay.
And having said that, what I would do, I would look at my notes from the past lesson
Okay.
and see what I didn't get right according to this teacher,
Mm,
what they thought I needed for the next lesson, whether it's a review or going to the next page in our lesson books. And I would focus my practice on improving on those areas that clearly I had a problem with. And when I finished practicing, I'd read the same book again to see, did I get this done? And if I didn't, how come? If I did I get it all covered?
right.
And with that kind of plan in my head, I could practice tomorrow with another view on how to get this lesson plan done that I need to get done to according to this teacher to get better playing the bass.
Right.
And because that time focus allowed me to be more productive, I can felt that if I just do 2 hours every day with no days off for grandma's visit and no hanging out late at night, if I
Mm,
could do that on a weekly basis, every day 2 hours with this program on how to practice productively, could I get better at this rate? And I felt that I could. So that's how I practiced early in my career.
right.
Right now, or up until March of 2020, I was playing bass 8 hours a day, either a recording session or a gig or teaching students. I mean, I was really on the bass 8 hours a day. So
Right.
there's no need to practice in terms of practicing books.
Right.
I
Right.
knew what I needed. I
Right.
got to remind me to get it done.
And all
Having
these.
said that,
Yeah.
I do practice the lessons for the kids because I got to demonstrate what I want.
Right.
So that kind of, I still do that, but practice in terms of the sheer term of practicing, I don't have that kind of time anymore.
Right. Well, also I mean, half the stuff that we practice, you bring on. So, but it's interesting because I'd imagine that the world of a classically trained musician and their approach to learning a song and one that you learned for the jazz bandstand is obviously different, right? And I'm
Yes.
sure you have a lot of new students who come in who are maybe not studying classical music, just learning jazz bass.
Yes.
And because you've had the classical training, do you feel that there are things that maybe you're not able, that a student such as that would not be able to get in their practice routines?
Well, you know, um, how to answer that question and not sound lost. Um, I think one of the big differences between a classical lesson
Mhm.
and a jazz lesson per se,
Right.
and I know I'm walking into some deep water now, and someone's going to call your phone and they're going to be bomb your station. I think the classical lesson is more intent on having the student kind of imitate the teacher,
Hmm. Okay.
and that helps them continue, among other things, that teacher's concept one more generation.
Okay.
At my jazz lesson, I try to give the students that I think that they're going to need to find the notes that they want to play. And they're not my notes. They can't find my notes. I have a hard time finding them. I want them to have the skill level so they can make their own choices,
Right.
their own style of music, their own instrument.
Right.
So they're in charge of their direction. That's their thing. I'm not asking them to play like me. I think I'm one of me is enough, man. Come on. But I would demonstrate a phrase just so they can hear how I play it. What
Right.
I do, I invite them down to the gigs so they can see how I use the skill level that I'm showing them.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and actually the jazz student has a head start over the classical student because they can actually come to the rehearsal. They can actually sit next to me at the rehearsal.
Right.
You know, or
Right.
get to the gig and they pay, or get free entree to the jazz club for a set. I'm
Sure.
not sure the classical student can sit next to his teacher playing the Philharmonic at a
Sure.
rehearsal.
Correct. Correct.
You
It's
know, or I don't think he can walk into the warm-up room with the violinist screeching and stuff and hang out with his teacher. A jazz club, we encourage that kind of community.
right.
You know, I
Yeah.
want you to see what this looks like. What you walking into is this
Right.
kind of community feeling. You know,
Yeah.
I'm asking you to find your notes, and here's a blueprint to find your notes.
And you've been teaching, I mean, of course, teaching online over the last years. Has that been new for you? Were you doing that before the pandemic or?
No, I never felt that I could be successful because I wanted to be in the room with those people,
Hmm.
students. But clearly that wasn't possible.
Right.
And like most teachers, I've learned how to accept the good and the bad things about teaching online.
Sure.
Things that we can't control, the Wi-Fi signal, the Wi-Fi strength,
Right.
the neighbor's dog barking during the course of a half note. I mean, stuff that we can't control. So I've learned how to take that into consideration when we do lessons, and I've gotten much more patient at
Doing that.
much more
Right.
patient at someone knocking at the door, the mailman, at their door.
Or,
Stuff.
or if they haven't done their homework and they're on, you just mute themselves or find some
Yeah,
problems to do with
yeah,
the.
yeah, yeah. Or they don't have good gear all the time to have a lesson. That I understand those issues, and I've made that part of understanding as how best to do this, so the lesson won't suffer because of these incidents that we can't control. They have no control over.
Right. Wonderful. I, as a aspiring jazz guitar player, have a few questions for you about your history
Okay.
with Jim Hall. I know you've played with Herb Ellis and, of course, now Russell Malone. Um, but I just want to go back to Jim Hall for a little bit. I mean, this was an incredible 30-year relationship with
Yes.
music. And for many of us, your duo album is, I mean, a rite of passage, right? And I just want to understand, how did you work together for such a long period of time? It can't have been, it must have been amazing, but it must have been challenging too.
Well, I think a couple of things. It seemed to me Jim Hall's job was to make some sketch arrangements,
Hmm.
and my job was to make them work.
Okay.
And to do that, I have to trust his concept, and he has to trust my interpretation. And in 30 years, I can't remember us having any kind of disagreement on the results of this combination.
Amazing. Amazing.
You talk about going to the mat for God, I'd go to the mat for Jim Hall in a heartbeat. Whatever he needs, if he comes to my door, he's going to get it. I'm bringing this to the gig every night at Jim Hall. I'm going to do this night in and night out. Can you match that intensity? Can you match that determination? Because playing with me, you're not having a night off. No, you're not. I don't know that song at all. No,
Amazing.
and he would deliver every night. That's what made the night so challenging for the audience. They knew there was some sparks flying,
Right.
and all they had to do is pick out. All they had to pick out when it strikes them, when it gets to their table.
Right.
Man, I heard this set you guys did. It was fantastic. Yeah, thank you. I mean, okay. You know, fortunately, there are records of this performance that they speak of. You know, or that feeling that struck them about the sparks going. Uh, Jim Hall, Ron Carr at the Village West. That's a great duo record. Jim
Right.
Hall sounds wonderful, man, and the bass sounds good too. You know,
Great.
live in Monterey. You know, the first duo record we made. Jim Hall was an incredible orchestrator of the guitar,
Of course.
and my job was to make it work, which I had fun doing.
And you had, but your relationship started out with gigs at Kenny Burrell's club. Is that right? Something
Yes,
called the Guitar.
yes,
I mean, that's
called
so
guitar. Yes.
cool. Yeah, yeah. That's
Well,
what a history.
at the time there were a lot of duo rooms in New York, just piano and bass guitars. You know, piano and bass rooms. Bradley's, the Fifth Circle, Cedar Walton and Bobby Timmons were Duke Pearson kind of guys who started this duo scene in New York back in the mid '60s. And the owner, with Kenny Burrell's consent, decided to have a room with just bass and guitar, and it was the
Fantastic.
first one like that, you know. And with Kenny Burrell's name and Kenny Burrell's skill level playing guitar, it's a perfect draw, perfect match.
Right.
You could go here, Kenny Burrell, whenever you played in New York, because he'd be at this room on 50th and 10th Avenue. And to know that we had a place to play in New York all the time was a boon to both of us. I was still uh, getting my feet wet in the New York situation, the music scene. You know, Jim Hall just kind of gotten tired of traveling for a while, and we had work that we could do together in New York. And you know, we would go out occasionally do a concert here or there, but we never went out for this 4 or 5 weeks like we did when we were in different groups. You know, it was nice to go out just for 2 or 3 concerts and come back. You know, but he was a gem, Gem, as well as a Jim, and I miss him dearly.
That's amazing. Well, you guys, you both created history, and I mean, uh, material for us to live by. So I think that's really
Thank you.
incredible. I just wanted to ask, you would worked with Herb Ellis before, you worked with Wes Montgomery, with George
Yes.
Benson leading up to all of this. And
Mhm.
do you think you could have created something similar with them? And did you ever think of it?
Well, they all play differently,
Right.
and I felt that as long as they're going to do what they do, like Herb Ellis played great Count Basie kind of quarter note time, just a tremendous feeling,
Right.
tremendous placement of the beat, you
Right.
know. And I said, I want to learn what notes does it take to make that really work differently, you know. Wes Montgomery's sound was so unique, you know, with the octaves and the color of his sound with his thumb. My job was, can I make him hear every note I play? Will one note get lost in the sound of his guitar?
Right.
You know, George Benson had such great skill. Will my bass lines get lost in George's skill level?
Mm.
You know,
Right.
with Jim Hall's color of his sound, his sensitivity, will my notes get lost in what Jim does? So each of these 5 guitarists offered me a chance to work on a different aspect of the bass. And I wouldn't trade that going to school with those guys for anything, man. I was a free student, man, for all those gigs.
Amazing.
And I'm happy to say that I learned enough to be able to transfer it to the following guitar players you mentioned. Yeah, Gene Bertoncini. They all bring something to me. All have a different challenge, you know. Eric Gale.
Hey,
You
Gail,
know, all
yeah.
these guys, man, they brought something to me. I had to figure out how to make it work with them because they all have different needs in how they do what they do. I'm saying, don't change what you do, man. I'm going to show you how to sound better with my note choices, with my sound, with my range of where I play these notes. And we had some great moments. All those guys, man.
And that
Russell
brings,
Malone. Yeah, Russell. It's a ball to play with these guys, man, because they bring something else that I don't do with anybody other guitar player. Russell requires something else from me.
right,
My job is to give it to him.
right. For those who are uninitiated, I'm also a recent convert because I hadn't heard the Golden Striker Trio before last week, and I have to say it is outstanding. It's on the playlist, and especially a tune called Golden Striker, which has these. I mean, it's
Yes,
incredible. I mean, the contrapuntal lines, the guitar, the comping behind it feels like there's a hi-hat going on. It's just, it's incredible. It's magic.
yes,
Um,
yes,
so it's new for us as well. This is really great stuff. In these sessions that you had with all of these musicians, some of them you didn't have the time to prepare, right? I mean, these are records that were going out.
yes.
How would
There's
you?
no rehearsal time, no budget, no time. Get to the date and make the music. Yeah. We were also busy with our own projects. Rehearsal time just wasn't available. They were coming in from out on the road with their bands. They go to the studio with this pickup band, me, Grady Tate, Herbie Hancock, whoever they happen to be. And our job is to feel like we belong there.
Hmm, amazing.
Amazing. Yes.
It's
I don't
just,
know how we did that stuff, man, but we
yeah,
did it every night, every gig.
it's I mean, I feel like I'm living vicariously through you. I can't describe it. This week has been incredible. It's just this week of research into all of these aspects of the last 60 years of creating magic. I mean, all of these musicians were at the top of their game. They were all
Yes.
either,
Yes.
I mean, they were, and it was more than that. They were humans, which I mean, they all had these levels of complexity, right? It's not that they're just virtuosos. They brought
Yes.
so much to the table,
Yes.
it's just a fascinating. It's just fascinating to hear this, and I think you've done so much for us by being here and sharing some of these
Thank
stories. And
you.
I'm sure there's just so many. Um, before I let you go for the rest of the day, I do have a question for you, and that is
Okay.
that would you give us some input into how could build and nurture a great jazz community in India and in Southeast Asia?
Um,
It's a tough
it's not.
one, I know.
No, 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 no. I got the answer is it's not complicated. The first thing you have to do is introduce the music to the kids in the second grade. That means like they're 7 years old.
Okay.
I think the later you wait to introduce them to the jazz, the more things that have been in their lives to distract them from focusing on what jazz sounds like.
Mm.
And I'm okay. There's music. There's rap. There's hip hop. There's a local music. There are
Yep.
rockers. There's stuff. There's stuff's around. I like to have them be involved in the jazz music community at 6 or 7, like they are with the normal AM, FM radio music. The second thing is to provide them with a teacher who's going to help them understand what it took to make that solo that they're singing sound so great.
Right.
And the third thing is to turn on the radio and have some jazz playing. If you can do those three things with some kind of level of consistency, you're kind of growing your audience. You're kind of growing musicians who might not be musicians until they realize, I like this music. And you're helping their parents understand, my child likes this music. Let me try and find out why he likes this music. If you can get those three things in place, I can assure you that your jazz community is going to go like this pyramid, man. It's
All right.
more and more and more and more. I'm telling you. It
That's
takes
our
those three things, I think.
that's my job. That's our job.
Yes, thank you.
We're going to do right by you. Before we sign off, Mr. Carter and Penny, I just need to talk to you for 1 minute post the live stream, if that's okay. But everybody who tuned in, if you have more questions, please do send them to me. Please do check out this updated playlist. It's incredible. There's a lot of it's got heart and soul, and it's a lot shorter than the one we had over the weekend, which was 5 hours long. But thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Good night. All right.